Welcome to History from Horseback. Last episode, we were discussing rare and endangered horse breeds that come from North America, and Keely and I ended up yapping for a long time, as we do. And so we again split this episode into two parts. And so this is the second part of that episode. It's not necessary for you to have listened to the first part. However, if you want to have a little more context, feel free to go back to that previous episode and listen to that one. In this episode, we're just going to be picking right back up and talking about some more rare and endangered breeds. So I hope you enjoy. Let's get into it. All right, and moving on to yet another gated breed, we have the Puerto Rican Paso Fino. I'm curious how much you've heard about Paso Finos.
So Pasafinos are like a horse that I have to tell my friends about a lot of the time because they see the viral clips of the Pasafinos doing the Fino Gate. And they are like, this is AI, or this is fake, or this is weird, or it's cruelty. They're making them do it. And I'm like, there's this one YouTube clip that I love sending to people of a Pasofino foal following its mother around, literally doing the Fino Gate. And I'm like, no, they do it from birth. Like, I can't explain to you any clearer than showing you this video that it's in their brains from the time they are moving. Like, they know how to do it. And it's weird. It looks really weird. And when you put shoes on them and put them on a wooden floor and make them do the gate across the floor, it's very loud and very weird. But yeah, it's really cool. And I think Pasafinos, because I always say to people when they show it, like they send me a clip and they're like, "Is this real?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like this is a Pasofino, or a Peruvian Paso, like it could be sometimes." But yeah, it's always really funny because it's always off a viral clip of someone being like, "What the hell am I watching?" And it's like, it's real. It is real. I promise you, it's real. And that's why they do it. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, honestly, I was like, whoa, what is going on here? Like, before
Yeah.
I really learned a lot about Pasafinos. They are pretty popular here in like the southwestern United States.
hmm
Especially like here near the border with Mexico. But yeah, they're cool.
They are. They're really unique. And as much as it's difficult to explain to people that they do it like that on purpose, yeah, I mean, it's also like it's a learning experience, and it's cool to show to be able to, show people new breeds and like, just sort of expand people's horizons when it comes to sorts of stuff like that.
Absolutely. So the ancestors of the Puerto Rican Pasofino, they were brought to Puerto Rico by Columbus, and then later more were brought by Ponce de Leon. The breed included Andalusians, Spanish Barbs, and the Spanish Jeanette, which is a callback back to our
Yeah,
medieval episode. Yeah.
yeah, huge throwback. Hope you watched it. I mean, listen
Yeah.
to it.
Yes.
Hope you paid attention.
One kind of side note is that the Livestock Conservancy, they consider the Spanish Jeanette extinct. There are also
Oh
people
yeah.
who claim that the Spanish Jeanette is still an existing breed.
Hard to sort of,
It's
yeah.
hard to figure out. Like, I'm sure there is a horse breed called the Spanish Jeanette that is still around.
Yeah.
And that's all I'm going to say about that because that's all I know about about it.
Yeah.
But they used to be more common in the medieval times, and they were seen as like this really prized, good quality horse that was gated. So it doesn't surprise me that the Paso Fino gets their ancestry from them.
Yeah, of course.
Now the Paso Fino has a four-beat gait, kind of, a slightly irregular gait that's supposed to be very smooth, but is not quite a trot and not a walk. And that is called the Paso Fino, which is called the fine step, is the translation.
Which is, if you've ever seen it, in action, you'll know exactly why it's called that.
Yes. And it is a natural gait. They know it from birth. There actually is like a gene that they are like isolating the genes down that make horses gated and able to do this. Now, there are kind of three different variations of their gait. There's the classic pheno, and that's mostly what we're referring to when we're talking about the things you've seen online that you would potentially see in viral videos. It's collected, it's like dancing in place, and their legs move really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's also usually done, if you see it in competition, you'll see it done over wooden boards or like a platform so they can really hear it and hear the perfect beat of it.
yeah. Now, there's also the Paso Corto, which is a medium trot-like gait that is the one that my I've seen my friends Paso Fino do
Yeah.
out on the trail. It's very interesting how like you can see that their backs barely like move up and down because of the way that their legs move. And then there's the Paso Largo, which is a fast ground covering version of the gait. In 1987, the Pure Puerto Rican Paso Fino Federation of America Incorporated was put together in order to protect the breed. And the breed is currently regulated in Puerto Rico by the Paso Fino Office of the Department of Agriculture. So the government itself regulates this breed. Some characteristics of them: they have a refined head with a straight profile. They tend to be kind of rounder than what the US gated breeds look like.
Yeah, definitely so.
They tend to be around 13 to 15 hands high, so not super tall, and they vary from around 700 to 1,100 pounds.
Which is like 315 to 500 kilos. Again, with a grain of salt.
They have a variety of colors, including pinto, and they also have something called a tiger eye, which is a recessive genetic trait found in the breed. Basically, their eye is kind of like it's like, a more amber light brown color, but they also have a brown sclera. So the whites of their
Yeah.
eyes are like light brown.
Which is really cool.
Yeah. And so that is something that is exclusive to the breed, and it's a recessive trait.
There is a TikTok account that I follow that has a lot of Pasafinos.
Oh, really?
And I forget what they're called, but they're so much fun. I think they're called Smooth Moves Ranch.
I like that. That's a good
Yeah.
name.
But like the guy and his wife that run the place are so funny and like they have such a great little like attitude about things. But yeah, they're called Smooth Moves Ranch, one word. And they have a bunch of different horses and whatnot, and they rescue Pasafinos too when they find them. They rescued one a little while ago who had a really big weaving problem, and he was a super anxious horse, and I think he's doing a lot better now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um, but you can always also like you can tell really easily that they're Pasafinos because they're quite a bit smaller than you would expect, and like they all
Hmm.
have like the very like you said like the super refined heads, and like they all come in like the like classic Spanish horse colors. Like they're either
Hmm.
gray or buckskin or like a really deep bay, and it's just yeah, they're
Hmm.
super cute. I really love them. Great
Yeah.
account though, super fun to watch.
So the next horses that I'm going to talk about all fall under one larger category of colonial Spanish horse. So the colonial Spanish horse is a group of closely related breeds that are all descended from horses brought by Spanish colonists and conquistadors. From the 1500s to the mid 1800s, Spanish horses were what were most common in North America. Then, in the mid to late 1800s, many of those horses were bred or replaced by larger horses such as thoroughbreds. The few remaining herds of pure Spanish descent were either isolated geographically or they were owned by traditional ranchers or Native American tribes. The colonial Spanish horse can be considered a distinct breed. And then these breeds that I'm going to talk about can either be considered breeds or just strains of the larger breed. They're also commonly called Spanish Mustangs, and I've heard this used a lot more than colonial Spanish horse. And while that's not wrong, it can be kind of a confusing misnomer because not all of these different strains are feral like Mustangs. And most Mustangs nowadays are not of pure Spanish blood. They've been mixed with other bloodlines. Some of them purposefully. They were like, we can't let people have access to these really fine, fast horses. Let's purposefully release some draft horses out there to make them a little
Oh
slower.
yeah, I can only imagine.
So I'll go through these guys. They all have a pretty similar origin, which is that they were descended from Spanish horses brought over by the Spanish. So the banker horse, also called like the Shackleford Island horse or Shackleford horse, is a semi-feral breed that was developed on the Outer Bank Islands of North Carolina. Their most famous population is the Shackleford Island population, because that is the largest island of this collection. In 1996, the foundation of Shackleford horses was organized in order to protect the breed alongside the National Park System. So the National Park System also actually manages this breed of horse.
It is really funny to me how many horse breeds in North America have just popped up on islands in certain
Right?
places.
I
There are
know.
so many of them. It's like
Yep.
horse got onto island, now it's a breed. Like,
Yes.
and it happens everywhere. Like, East Coast, West Coast, doesn't really matter. It's literally everywhere.
At least three of the ones that we're talking about now are going to be like that. They're
Yep.
island breeds.
Yep. Just popped up from an island. Incredible.
Characteristics of the banker horse, they tend to be short. Most of these are going to be on the shorter side. They're under 14.2 hands high. Bay and chestnut are the most common colors with some dun, but no pinto. And they are a critically endangered breed, which makes sense considering that they live on an island.
Yeah, yeah, that'll come with coming from an island. If
Yeah.
you're an island breed, you are critically endangered, unless you're very lucky.
Next, we have the Vaca Chica, or the Vaca Barb horse. In the late 1800s, the Vaca family, they established a farm in New Mexico, and they had settled from Mexico. Now, the family, when they arrived, in order to have horses for use on the ranch, they just gathered the Spanish Mustangs that lived in the area. They then bred and preserved the bloodline. And one member of the family who is really notable in the preservation of this like breed or strain of horses was Doroteo Jody Baca, who he was a soldier. He fought in the Korean War, and when he returned, he was in need of healing. He said that his heart needed healing and his soul needed healing, and he found that in the horses that his family had. So he made it his mission to preserve this local strain of Spanish horses that were rapidly disappearing. And so he sourced them from his own ranch as well as from the Tijeras Mountains, which were the local mountain range. Those horses hadn't been influenced by other bloodlines. And then
Mm.
also local Native American tribes and individuals, they also had some of these Spanish horses, and so he bought them from them. In 2005, Jody and his wife Virginia were recognized for preserving the colonial Spanish horse. They did some genetic testing on them and found that they indeed were like these Spanish horses. In 2013, unfortunately, the herd was dispersed, but the breed is currently being preserved by the Blue Oaks Center. So quite a few of these breeds you'll find they are currently being preserved by like heritage centers and ranches and associations. They tend to be like nonprofit groups that are led by a board of directors rather than just one
Yeah.
person. Which I
And I
think is
suppose
a pretty
it's
good idea for.
yeah, and I suppose it's a lot safer way of keeping them of because as soon as you have one person looking after an entire breed, as soon as that person goes to retire and has a child that doesn't want anything to do with it, it's game over. And
Exactly.
like, it's not a cheap thing to do. Like,
Mm-hmm.
keeping a breed alive, like horse breeding is expensive to begin with. Like, let
Mm-hmm.
alone trying to do it on a grand scale to bring a breed back into, you know, like a non-endangered spot.
Characteristics of this strain or breed, they tend to be 13.2 to 14.3 hands high and weigh around 650 to 850 pounds.
Like 300, 385 kilos. I assume that they could probably push into like the 400 range, but that would be on your like, your very rare end of huge,
Yeah,
of a huge version of this breed.
yeah. They come in a variety of colors, but no dun or pinto, and they are critically endangered.
Interesting that these guys have no, like the no done, so no, what's it called? Primitive markings and whatnot.
Yeah, you'll find it's like interesting. That's kind of one thing that really differentiates some of
Mm,
these like populations and
yeah.
strains is that some of them like don't have that at all and others like they're known for it. So next we have the Choctaw horse. The indigenous Choctaw people of America bred these horses when they were brought by the Spanish and then were roaming around. And so the Choctaw people came across them either by capturing wild horses or feral horses. They could have traded them and, of course, may have stolen some of them. And they called these horses Isuba, meaning deer resembler, which I love hearing different names for horses because a lot of them are like dog, deer.
Yeah.
Originally, this breed was bred in the ancestral home of the Choctaw, which is modern day Alabama and Mississippi. However, in the 1830s, the Choctaw were forced to relocate to modern day Oklahoma, and they brought the horses with them when they were forced to do this. Now, relocation unfortunately meant fewer breeders, and the horse population in general shrunk then and has shrunk over time. You also kind of have to acknowledge that there is a power play, or there's power differentials at play here.
Yeah.
Because, like, especially back then, like, horses were status, horses were power, horses were self sufficiency. You know, they were people's transportation and their means of working or making food for themselves, farming food for themselves, collecting food for themselves. And so, if you're trying to get rid of a group of people, it's advantageous to take away their horses or to make it really difficult for them to continue breeding their horses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It also doesn't really fit your racist, like, superiority mindset to be like, oh, these people are savage and stupid. But then also, they have some of the finest, like, pure Spanish horses in
That you
existence.
Yeah, and it's so yeah, of course you want them.
Characteristics of the Choctaw horse breed include that they reach around 13.2 to 14.2 hands high, so again, not super tall. They tend to have highly variable coats, and this can include pinto coloration or Appaloosa spotting. They're often gated, so they often have that 4 beat gait. And they are unfortunately critically endangered. In 1970, there were less than 50 of them left. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you may have realized that I enjoy trail riding. Well, out here in Texas, the trails can get rocky and hard. Just like humans, horses need protection on their feet to avoid chipping and bruising. Some horses, like my horse Ace, don't need to wear metal shoes 24/7, but could use protection out on the trail or in other circumstances. This is where Scoot Boot comes in. Scoot Boot Hoof Boots offer comfort and protection for your equine's feet. Their hoof boot technology includes unique tread patterns that provide traction and support, built-in drainage for water, mud, and sand, and a flexible, shock-absorbing sole. Our listeners can receive a 10% discount on any purchase of Scoot Boot products. Just follow the link included in the episode's description and use promo code HISTORYFROMHORSEBACK on checkout. That's History from Horseback with no spaces at scootboots.com. Next, we have the Florida Cracker Horse.
Florida Cracker Horse is another one that was in the mod that I was using. And it was used like as one of the replacements for the more common horse, like that you'd find in towns and find the NPCs riding and whatnot.
Makes sense.
As well as like you'd find them out in the wild too, which I thought was fun. But it was just nice to have them as an option, and especially because they probably would have been everywhere.
Yeah. Which is just so funny because they're one of those breeds that like I had never heard of before until like I don't even know when I learned about them. But it wasn't for a while.
Yeah, yeah. I would never have known for it if it weren't for Red Dead and for that mod in particular, but also because there was also the Florida Cracker Cow as well.
Yeah, I think that's what I learned about it from when I Googled Florida Cracker Cow and then I found out about the Florida Cracker Horse.
Yeah, and it's like, well, I mean, if you're gonna have the cow and you needed a horse to herd them, like why not have it be the same thing? Like that's awesome.
So they originated in Florida in the 1500s. They were developed for herding cattle. And the reason for their name is that the Florida cattlemen were called crackers because they mostly used whips in order to put pressure on the cows. They didn't actually whip the cows, but they would crack or make the sound with their cow whips, and that would get the cows to get moving. And so they became known as crackers, and then that's how we got the name Florida Cracker Horse and the Florida Cracker Cow. And also, I think that is where like the colloquial term cracker, when talking about like a white person, comes from, which is
I was
pretty
gonna say, is
funny.
that where that also comes from? Because that's really funny too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's similar to like, vaquero becoming buckaroo,
Yeah. Yep.
and yeah. So in the 1930s, the Dust Bowl happened. If you're unfamiliar with that, it was basically a huge environmental disaster where there were high winds that were basically blowing all of the topsoil across the what is called the Dust Bowl area, which is like northwestern Texas panhandle into Oklahoma, where they just kind of over tilled that land, over farmed it, and all of the soil just became like dry dust and it just got blown, and there were dust storms constantly, and this was not great for the cattle living there because it could actually like cause them to die from respiratory issues.
Yeah, I
So
can only imagine.
yeah, so there is a big issue, and also, the Great Depression at the time. And so the government, in an attempt to kind of help, they tried to move the cows to Florida, which one of those times when the government did not help. They just kind of
No.
created a new issue because these new cows, they had a parasite called screwworm, which is as gross as it sounds.
Yeah, it sounds awful.
Yeah, it's not great. So the cows brought this parasite and they introduced it to the Florida cows. And with it, it brought an entirely new way of having to keep cows, to raise them. And so now these cows needed to be fenced so they could be kept in like a smaller area, and they needed to be roped in order to receive this parasite treatment rather than before where they were more free roaming and they didn't need to be roped by the cattlemen. They would just control them using like their whips and their just the movement of their horses. And so Unfortunately, the agile cracker horse, which was smaller, it was replaced by the stronger and stockier quarter horse. Because when you're roping, if for those of you unfamiliar with like roping a cow, you wrap one end of your rope to a part of the saddle of your horse called the horn, and then your horse is holding that cow still.
Yeah.
So you have to have a strong horse. And also like a horse that isn't just gonna be like, well, bye, because then you get off your horse and you go give the cow its medication or whatever you need to do with it. You need a horse that you trust and is strong, particularly.
Yeah. Especially when you consider as well that like that's how branding used to happen too.
Hmm.
You know, you'd tie him down on the horn of the saddle and the horse would hold him while you had another guy on the back legs and
Yeah,
you just pop brand him on and off you go. Like,
yeah,
I mean, some people still do that to this day.
yeah. They
There's
do.
heaps of content on TikTok, especially of branding practices like that still going around and you know working as intended.
But unfortunately, the cracker horses got replaced. However, there were some families that worked to keep the breed from extinction. That includes the Ayers, Harvey, Bronson, Matchett, Parton, and Whaley families. In 1989, the Florida Cracker Horse Association was organized in order to preserve the breed. Characteristics of this breed is that they tend to be on the smaller and more slender side, definitely compared to quarter horses. They range from 13.2 to 15.2 hands high and weigh around 700 to 1,000 pounds.
Which is around 315 to 450 kilos, so pretty average.
They are a wide variety of colors, and while they are endangered, they are growing. And so now there are just over 1,000 horses. The Galiceño horse is our next breed of colonial Spanish horse. So in the 1500s, horses were brought to Hispaniola by Columbus and then later Cortez. The horses then were moved to Mexico during the attacks on the Aztecs because they were using these horses to ride as a cavalry. Once the Aztecs were kind of considered conquered, the Spanish kind of just let their horses roam and they were free to breed in southern Mexico, but they were still isolated and so that kept their bloodline pure. Fast forward to 1958 to the mid 1960s, some people from the US started importing the breed from Mexico, and this included Harvey Meckham, Glenn Bracken, and Charles Dolan. And funny enough, they all live in Texas, so if this is a breed I might see if I wanted to go looking for it, even though they are very rare. In 1959, the Galiceño Horse Breeders Association was established. Characteristics of this horse is that they tend to be pretty small, but they are sturdy and they can carry a full grown person. But they range around 12 to 13.3 hands high. They have a variety of colors, but no Pinto and no Appaloosa. And they are critically endangered with less than 200 of them.
This is definitely one of those breeds that I've heard of at some point, but never really. I've never consciously like thought about them or like I swear to God I've heard of them before though.
Yeah, same. Where I was like, I don't know where I've heard of them, but I swear I have.
Mm. But it's like if you had been like, okay, so what do they look like? I would have been like, no idea.
Yeah,
But the name sounds really familiar.
yeah. Next is the Marsh Tacky, which
Such a great name,
it
by the way.
is.
So very cute.
They were developed in South Carolina as another semi feral breed on an island. So they roamed the wild in the Sea Islands and the Low Country, and they were used by wealthy and poor locals alike. Basically, you know, anyone could catch these horses and then keep them as their own. Some trivia about them: they were the favored horse of presidential advisor Bernard Baruch or Barrick. I don't know who that is, but when I was reading the trivia, I was like, it sounds like I should know who this is.
There's so many old Australian politicians that I would not be able to name, point out of a book, or even pay attention to. So,
Yeah. I was like, cool. Don't know him. And then also Frank Lloyd Wright, who I do know about. He had like a South Carolina estate, and he had Marsh Tackies there. They were used by the Southern troops during the Civil War. One interesting piece of trivia that they talked about was how the Southern troops in the Civil War had to bring their own horses, while the Northern troops, the horses were seized by like the military and then given to people generally, unless you were like really high up there, and then you could kind of like
yeah.
purchase your own horse. So yeah, so because they were bringing their own horses, they were just like bringing their little marsh tacky that they had from home. They were also used by the Coast Guard to patrol the beach for U-boats in World War II, which I wonder. That seems like a job where they like would feel like they're doing something really important, but also
Mm.
why would German U-boats attack South Carolina first?
Also, like,
I
how are you gonna spot a German U-boat from
don't
a
know. I
beach?
don't know. I
Like,
guess that's a thing. I don't know though.
cheering you on, great job, really proud of you, but also like, did they ever find anything? Because I feel like they
I
didn't.
don't think they did. At the same time, though, I'd love to have that job because you're just riding your horse on the beach. I don't know, with
Yeah,
like binoculars or something, like scanning the water
I
every so
guess so.
often.
Yeah,
That
a
sounds
really fancy spyglass.
that sounds nice. From the 1960s and the 1970s, marsh tackies were raced on the beaches of Hilton Head Island, and apparently this is a practice they still do every once in a while. And in 2007, the Carolina Marsh Tacky Association was formed. In 2010, they were named the South Carolina State Heritage Horse. Characteristics of the breed: they reach around 13.2 to 15 hands high, around 700 to 900 pounds.
Or 315 to 400 kilos.
They have a 4-beat gait, which apparently is called the swamp foxtrot.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
But it also explains why they were used for patrolling
Mm-hmm.
and especially on. It's really funny to see how many of these horses were used as like either military horses or horses that had to be ridden for a really long time across a long stretch of land or something like that. Because it's like, well, yeah, having a nice ambling gait would have been awesome for those people who had to sit in the saddle all day. Like,
Yeah, because honestly, it's really nice. Like,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
they are mostly solid colored, and some of them do have primitive markings. So that's where we start getting into the primitive markings and colors.
Yeah.
Next, we have the Santa Cruz horse. So, a small herd of Spanish colonial horses were sent to the Santa Cruz Island in the 18th to 19th centuries, mostly for ranching, because they created a ranch there. And then they were kind of left semi-feral on the island, as one does. Uh,
Oh yeah. Because like, why would you take them back? Also, like, it screams. So this is like kind of off topic, but like in esports, when a big esports event happens, whoever's running the event, say like Riot or something, they'll pay a company like Secret Lab to brand a bunch of chairs and desks and like other things like that under whatever the event is. And then at the end of the event, they will give them away. They'll give them to staff, to players, to anyone who wants one. And I've seen that because my friend who has worked as staff on one of these events has been given a chair from these events because they don't want to pay to ship them back.
Yeah.
Like they don't want to put the money into taking all of it back with them. It is cheaper for them to produce them, like buy them and have them there and then just give them away than to pack them all up and ship them back to a warehouse where they'll just sit for no reason.
Yeah. Totally.
And I assume it's a similar thing, right? Like you're going to use them for all these things, but picking all of them up and moving them off of an island or off of a certain place and putting them somewhere else where they're just going to do the same thing, it just costs too much money.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times they just don't care enough as well.
Yeah. Totally. The Channel Islands have like a history of having these like ranches previously on them. So quite a few of them of these islands have feral cattle. And I think it was like the same exact thing where it's like it costs too much money to ship them at this point.
Why do that when we could do,
Yeah.
X other thing? Yeah.
I believe that I think it's Catalina Island. One of the Channel Islands has just had horseback riding return because, as we'll talk about in a moment, like all horses were removed from the Channel Islands for a while because it was these islands were like sold to the National Park Service, and they were really trying to restore the ecosystem of these islands because they have a very unique ecosystem. They have some species on there that are endemic only to this like tiny chain of islands off the coast of California, which I've gotten to visit Catalina Island. And so I think a lot of effort needed to be put in place to make sure that the horses weren't going to be left to run amok on the island and like disturb the ecosystem. But now it's another thing I want to do. I want to go ride on ride on the islands because they're beautiful and they're so cool. They have like they're surrounded by kelp forests. I know I'm getting off topic now, but they're surrounded by kelp forests, which is like an endangered like ecosystem that I mean they're coming back, and so these kelp forests are full of biodiversity and that sort of thing. I love that area, and I'd love to see horses there, but but I also get why they were removed. Like that's the one thing is that I don't think the horses should be destroyed or their bloodlines destroyed, but I also understand why we want to restore the ecosystem there. So I see both sides.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah. One interesting thing is that so Santa Cruz Island was a popular production site for Hollywood, and so it was often used. The horses were often used as stunt horses on the island. In the 1990s, the island was sold to the National Park Service. Some veterinarians took interest in these horses. So Dr. Karen Blumenschein, Dr. Joe Cannon, and Dr. David Jensen began studying the DNA of the horses. And part of this is that they wanted to prove that these weren't just like some shaggy little nags. They were like, okay, we think that these actually they might have like pure Spanish colonial blood in them. In 1998, despite efforts, the horses were removed from the island. They came under the care of Diane Nelson of the Wild Horse Sanctuary. Now, Christina Nooner of the Sunshine Sanctuary and El Champion Farms have helped to continue preserving the breed. Characteristics of these horses, they tend to be around 13.2 to 14.3 hands high. They have what was described as expressive gaits.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Spanish horse.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
I'll take that.
And they are famously tend to be palomino, chestnut, and buckskin.
Lots of reds and bays.
Yes. Next, we have the Sulphur Springs Mustang. This is one of the few that I had like definitely heard about before.
Yeah, it's like I was thinking, I was wondering if these guys had anything or any similarities to like the Kiger Mustang and like how they developed and stuff. Because the only other like Mustang that I like specific Mustang that I know of is obviously the Kiger Mustang because it's the one that Spirit was based off of.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the
but
Kiger Mustang is a colonial Spanish horse. I just don't know if it's like endangered enough to have been on the list.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I can imagine it might have been at one stage, but
Yeah.
considering how much popularity it gained from Spirit, it probably got a huge boost in that regard.
Yeah.
And I'm not even joking when I say that. Like movies like that are huge in bringing things to front and center like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if I mean, they could potentially be still considered endangered, but they just didn't make the list, so don't at me. I didn't mean to leave them out.
Yeah, yeah, no. I don't think anyone's gonna be upset with you for that one.
Yeah, I'll talk about them another time. We could do I could somehow fit an entire spirit episode.
Genuinely. Yeah, genuinely.
But yeah, so the Sulphur Springs Mustang, so it is a herd of Mustangs that, unlike most other modern herds of Mustangs, they've remained genetically isolated and still retain their Spanish bloodlines. They reside in the Sulphur Springs Herd Management Area in southwestern Utah. And just like other Mustang herds throughout the United States, they're managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And so I think about annually, BLM organizes roundups of feral horse herds in an attempt to control the population. So this is a breed that you can adopt through the BLM's program.
Yeah, there's another one as well called like there's like a Devil's Ridge Mustang or something like that. I can't remember. And they're also managed by BLM. And I know that they have like a few characteristics that like people look at them and they're like, oh my God, that's where they're from.
Yes,
Um,
there's quite a few, they call them like herd management areas.
yeah.
And so, like, there's quite a few different areas, and people who know their Mustangs are able to like know things like about them, like characteristics about them, just like based off of the area they're from.
Yeah. Devil's Garden is the one I was
Devil's
thinking of,
Garden,
sorry.
I've heard of.
Yeah,
Yes,
Devil's Garden Mustangs.
I
Yeah, yeah.
believe that's where I'm pretty sure that a friend of mine from back in California, I believe she has a Devil's Garden Mustang, and
That's really cool.
yeah, she chose her as a baby, but she selected her really based on like the quality of her movement and her conformation.
Mm.
And and she's like growing up and she's so pretty. She looks really pretty like Spanish blooded
Yeah.
because of like just how she selected her and everything. And she just moves so nicely. But she is a little wild child.
Yeah, yeah.
So there is an organization called the Sulphur Springs Horse Registry Incorporated that works to promote and preserve this breed or this strain. And one thing I feel remiss if I don't say this, but considering right now the like political environment in the United States, there is unfortunately the possibility that the Bureau of Land Management won't be able to manage Mustang herds in the
Mm.
future. And so that is something that like is kind of sad to hear.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of devastating to be honest.
Yeah, because if they're not able to manage them, like argue what you will about whether you think the current way of doing it is humane or effective or whatnot. If they don't get any funding whatsoever, or if they don't have anybody working for them anymore to do these jobs, they're either going to need to resort to not doing anything at all with the horses, in which case no one will be able to like own, adopt any new Mustangs. And also
Yeah.
they will be wreaking like havoc on their environments. Or they're going to say this is too much work, we're just going to like cull them all, in which case they'll be
Yeah, you'll
wiped
just get
out.
a situation like in Australia where it's not worth like a very, very small percentage of wild horses in Australia, like Brumbies, are corralled and caught. The rest of them are culled, and we cull up to like 3,000 of them a year. And that's very normal procedure and has been happening for as long as I can remember. And it's like, yeah, if you don't have people who are going to go out there and corral them and bring them in and sell them and whatnot, you will just get, like, you will just resort to culling all of them the same way that we do.
Yeah. So that's like something that like just the people who are interested who like Mustangs, who are interested in them, that's something that has like come up that people have been discussing because there's no longer any really like money going towards any of these programs, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
So characteristics of the Sulphur Springs Mustang. On that note,
On that note,
um, they tend to reach around 13.2 to 15 hands high. They are in a variety of colors, including dun, buckskin, gruya, and roan, and they often have primitive markings, which is going to be the like kind of zebra stripes on the legs and the line on their back. Next, last but not least, we have the Wilbur Cruz horse. In 1885, the foundation horses were purchased by Dr. Reuben Wilbur in Arizona from Rancho del Sueño in Sonora, Mexico. Similar to some of these other stories, the horses were kept in genetic isolation on the ranch. In 1990, a portion of the Wilbur Cruz Ranch was sold to the Nature Conservancy. And
hmm,
if you don't know much about like the Nature Conservancy and what they do, one kind of neat thing is that so you can sell a portion of your land to them and they basically make it, oh, I'm forgetting the word for it, but they set it aside so that the land cannot be developed into things like housing or commercial. They can't like, destroy it in order to extract resources from it, that sort of thing. You can continue to do things like practice a certain amount of like farming or ranching on the land.
hmm,
And another cool thing is that then basically environmental scientists, biologists, they can come out and do studies on your land. They can do different habitat restoration out there. Basically, if you're like a nature lover who you're like, I have this land and I don't want it ever to be destroyed or like bulldozed over, you can sell it like this where you still kind of own part of the rights to it. So that's another thing is that so you can still access it, you can still enjoy going out there at any time. It's still like part your land,
yeah.
but then also it can be used for all of this, which I think is pretty cool. And so that's kind of what they did with a portion of their ranch. In this case, the Nature Conservancy, they pay you money. And so when this land was sold, the horses were donated to the American Livestock Breed Conservancy because the owner at the time, she couldn't manage the horses anymore, but she saw like the value in them,
Yeah.
and saw that they were like could be a heritage breed. And so rather than like dispersing the herd, she donated it.
Which is so like it's really cool that someone could see that in like in hindsight. Like
Yeah,
they could be like, they've been kept in isolation for so long, like they could be a heritage breed. Like, let's just check before we do anything stupid here.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's super cool. So now they're overseen by Robin Collins of the Heritage Discovery Center in California. Characteristics of the breed are that they can reach around 13.2 to 15 hands high, and they come in a variety of colors, including pinto and roan. And those are all of the breeds that I will talk about today for this episode. You know what was funny is that when I was like first thinking of doing this episode, I was like, oh, there aren't like that many of them. I can put them all in. That'll be great. And then it was just like I I wrote like the most pages of notes that I have written for an episode, mostly because of their bullet points.
Mm.
I was
It
like,
like
oh my
baits you though,
god.
because you're like, oh yeah, they're bullet points. It's not a lot to say, and then it's like, oh wait a second.
Yeah, I have to form them into real sentences. And it is just like a lot of information all kind of compacted.
Thank you for listening to History from Horseback. We hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we are on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, so give us a follow for more historical horse content. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you out on the trail. Griff came into my room the other day, and I touched the top of his head, and he was so hot on the top of his head. And I was like, I freaked out because I was like, why is just this part of his head so hot?
Sometimes Julia will like go out and just lay in the sun, like sunbathe, and then she'll come back inside and then she's all toasty warm. And then I'm like, "Oh, it's a toasted dog." And then I call her a chilled dog when she comes back from outside and she's like cool. But that's weird that just one part of him got all hot.
Yeah, that's what I was like so confused about. I was like, huh?